Good evening, friends. This is Altazar, welcoming you to tonight's presentation, Astrology, revealing the planet Mars and its position in a person's astrology chart that can indicate their passion, especially their passion for living, and even their sexuality to a certain extent, as well as the service and or life purpose identity expression that they may have a passion for, as well as the negative side of when one is not really channeling the positive energies of passion, the way that one's ego may cause one to alienate others, if not harm themselves. So I welcome you all. Again, my name is Altazar of www.altazarastrology.com, and also my YouTube channel, Altazar Astrology. So I welcome you to go to that channel for other videos on highly interesting and informative topics related to personal growth and the current cycles that are happening in the world and in our lives. But tonight, wouldn't it be interesting to find out what your astrology chart shows about you and what you're calling for the passion expression of your identity is in this life? Everyone has an astrology chart, and everyone has Mars placed in a specific sign. Now, your Mars placement is not necessarily the same as your sun sign placement. So let me get back into a little brief discussion here about an astrology chart and how you might find out where your Mars placement is. And if you've never had an astrology chart made, you're certainly welcome to contact me or look up on the internet, if you know how to do that, your astrology chart, and I can tell you what your Mars sign is. So even though you're an Aries or a Leo or a Virgo or a Capricorn, your Mars could be in any other sign, any of the 12 signs. So that's why you have to uniquely find out where your Mars placement is. However, tonight, I'm going to go through Mars as it's placed in all the different signs. And if you want to reference this video to after you find out where your Mars placement is, you can see it on YouTube. And here again, where the description is of your Mars sign placement. So tonight I'm going to go through the signs and talk about Mars in its sign placement in your chart as it may reveal your passion, as well as your potential service and or life purpose passion, and or how you may tend to alienate others through too much attachment to your ego. So before I do that, I'm going to briefly tell you what an astrology chart is for those of you who have never had a chart. Many of you may just simply know what your sun sign is by virtue of reading horoscopes in the newspapers or magazines or even on the menu at a restaurant. So right here we have the chart of Elizabeth Taylor. And I would like to mention that this chart is based on a person's birth date, time, and location. Now you can find out your Mars placement simply by knowing your birth date without your birth time. Location helps, but even then, just your birth date is adequate to see where all the planets were placed the day you were born. So just briefly, and for those of you who have experience with an astrology chart and that will be moving on from this very quickly. However, for those not familiar, in an astrology chart, when you're born, specifically to the date, time, and location, the planets, that is the Sun, Mercury, Mars, all the way out through Pluto, were all in unique individual astrology signs the day you were born. And each of these planets symbolizes an attribute or quality that you may have. and associated with your life expression. So, for example, Mercury in your chart and in a sign, which may be different than your sun sign, tells us how we may communicate in our daily life, how we are inclined to evolve our intellectual mind, and how we may associate with sharing information with others. The planet Venus in a chart, and her chart and Elizabeth Taylor's is in Aries, may tell us how we express love, affection, what our values are in life, how we approach our finances, money, and material things, as well as our idealism for art, aesthetics, and beauty. So tonight we are looking at the placement of Mars. So in Elizabeth Taylor's chart, we see that she's a sun sign Pisces, but by coincidence, she happens to have Mars in Pisces also. So that means she has an integrated expression, because the sun sign is meant to give us more the foundation symbolism of what we are here to ultimately actualize and evolve in our identity expression, but not necessarily what we tend to behave like. So that's why a lot of people are skeptical of astrology, who just simply read the newspaper horoscopes or generalized descriptions of their sun sign, that they may come to hear that the description of their sun sign doesn't fit for a lot of reasons. And that's because there are other planets may be in different signs, which masks the self-actualizing identity expression calling associated with their sun sign. But in Elizabeth Taylor's case, or possibly in your case, if your Mars is in the same sign as your sun sign, then you have a more integrated form of identity. And Mars is associated with somewhat the tendency and accumulated inclinations of your ego from prior lifetimes, which now brings me to the next segment of what I want to discuss here before we get into going through each of the planets, each of the signs that Mars might be placed in. And that is, well, what is an astrology chart? I've talked about this in other videos that I've done. It's the fundamental approach to spiritual astrology. And I am a spiritual astrologer. I've been doing this for over 30 years. And my training is associated with exploring the ancient Vedic Hindu perspective on astrology, as well as the Buddhist point of view on karma and reincarnation, as well as Chinese astrology and the character descriptions, as well as Western astrology, Western metaphysics, and psychology. So all of these points of view can be summarized as follows. In other words, this is the kind of foundation spiritual basis for why we are able to interpret a chart, and it's able to describe different qualities and attributes about you, even from the day you were born. So these points of view can be summarized as follows: that life is a school in which we're here to evolve our consciousness to higher and higher levels of awareness of the meaning of spiritual principles that, when inculcated in our attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors, yields greater and greater levels of harmony, happiness, peace of mind, prosperity, and loving relationships in our lives. It is said that we live many lifetimes, or what's known as reincarnation, for our soul to grow and evolve towards greater vibrational attunement and understanding of these spiritual laws and principles that lend towards, in essence, a greater attunement with the love of the universe and the love within our own hearts, which is a reflection of that universal love. So, your astrological chart is said to be your spiritual report card in the school of life, summarizing your karma from many lifetimes, and the symbolism of the planetary positions and the signs that they're in is reflective of to what extent you have evolved your energies in a positive way with these loving vibrational principles of behavior, attitudes, and beliefs, and to what extent either out of ignorance or egoic self-will, you haven't gotten it. And you have been out of attunement in various facets of life. And it's not a black and white situation. That's why the chart consists of these 11 planetary positions and 72 factors describing each individual. It's not just a single factor, your sun sign. Your sun sign is one of 72 factors. So the calling for each person in this life, and the Aquarian age is all about coming to a greater understanding of the unique individual spiritual path that you have in this life, is to understand what your harder karma is and what you need to get out of denial about and start healing this lack of attunement and start engaging the behaviors, attitudes, and beliefs that are the antidote and the uplifting vibrational dynamic for your soul growth. So that's the basis for the interpretation of, in spiritual astrology, one's astrology chart. However, tonight we're going to go into just the meaning of Mars in your chart and see what that implies about the calling for your passionate expression. We're spiritual souls in a human experience, in a material body, in a material world. And the calling we all have is to discover how we might become in alignment with this divine plan that your astrology chart reveals, to be in alignment with the more actualized expression of your identity, which yields a joyful and fulfilling and prosperous experience in life. Now, Mars and every planetary position can indicate a positive and high side to your nature, and also a negative or low side that detracts from your soul growth and causes difficulty or alienation. So I'm going to get into just removing this chart and bringing up the wheel of fortune here, the wheel of the planetary signs. We get some balance there. There we go. Okay, so these are the 12 zodiac signs. And so tonight I'm going to go through these signs and talk about Mars placed in each of these signs. Now, some of you may relate, if you don't even know what sign your Mars is placed in. You might feel a little familiar if you hear a description of Mars in the same sign as your sun sign is, because there can be some overlap to the energetic expression of Mars in a sign similar to your sun sign. But once again, I will emphasize the fact that you could be a Libra or a Taurus or a Pisces or an Aries, and your Mars position may be in any one of the 12 signs of the zodiac that's different. So what is Mars about? Fundamentally, Mars is symbolic of the sexual energy that animates your being. And that sexual energy can be elevated and expressed in a way that, we've heard the term find your passion in life. Well, that's really what it's all about, because when you find your passion in life, you have an enthusiasm, you have an excitement. It's almost like life is timeless when you're engaged in your passion. When you're not, and especially if you're on a job or in a career you don't particularly like or doesn't really engage your deeper, true life purpose gifts, then you're a clock watcher. And that's when you're caught up in time and living more of a frustrated existence. And that then lends towards acting out Mars in the negative sense, which for some includes addictive behaviors or an aberration of their sexual energies. So let's start out with the fire signs. So the fire signs are Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius. So you see I have these color-coded here. We have the fire signs in a reddish orange. We have the earth signs in a blue-green. We have the air signs in red with a yellow halo. And we have the water signs in appropriately bluish color, Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. So I'm going to go through this by element. And so we're going to start with the fire signs. So the fire signs represent, obviously, energy, enthusiasm, an inclination to be animated and expressive. And so the fire signs, when you have Mars in a fire sign, that implies, regardless of the more subtleties of your sun sign, which might be in water. Water puts out fire, right? I happen to be a water sign with Mars in a fire sign. A lot of people don't think I'm a water sign because I'm much more animated than the average water sign, especially a Pisces. So Mars is more how you act out and express work, service, physical dynamics of sports, recreational activity, and also even your sexuality and creativity. So if you're an Aries, Aries is of the fire signs, the match that starts the fire. It's the spark that gets things going. It's the initiator. So Aries is associated with the body, with the head. So often Aries people have large foreheads. They like to be the head of things. They're the proverbial self-starter. They're the entrepreneur. They're the initiator. They like to get going, get things going. They're inventive. They're pioneering. Okay, so people who have Mars in Aries tend to have that quality, regardless of what other sign your sun sign is in. Action-oriented and independent is an attribute of being or having Mars in Aries. And I want to just watch my time here. Okay, we're doing good. So now the professions that are associated with being or having Mars in Aries are people who like their independence, independent salespeople, people who are out in the field on their own, entrepreneurs who start, or inventors who start their own business. In the arts, they're often very physical oriented, gymnastics, dancers, and as well in sports, aggressive physical sports like football and soccer, or independent sports enthusiasts like extremists or joggers and runners. Also, people who are inclined to the military or law enforcement. So these are passions that people with Mars and Aries may pursue. Athletes. Also, people who work with metal, such as surgeons or metallurgists or dentists, and or people involved in construction. So these are other passions for people with Mars in Aries. Now, if you haven't engaged your passion with Mars in Aries and you are in the negative side of it, these are some of the negativities of having Mars in Aries: being impatient, impulsive, headstrong, selfish, demanding, overly demanding, too aggressive, combative, and militaristic. So, the basic nature of a Mars in Aries is a pioneer or a warrior. Now we're going to move on to the next fire sign, which is Leo. So Leo, the lion, we forgot to mention that Aries is the ram, the big horns head first. Leo the lion, proud, dignified, persevering, leadership oriented. The heart is connected with Leo, and animated, dramatic. So, and Leos are very, Mars in Leo are very passionate in a romantic sense, and romantically like to have share a creative experience with others, like theater or outdoor recreation, like Aries do, and like to celebrate a romance with also a mutual physical recreation experience, like both go play tennis or go golfing and then come home and make love. Then we also look at these key passionate possibilities for having Mars in Leo. And so leaders and politicians, Barack Obama is a Leo. I don't know where his Mars position is, but that's an attribute. Actors, entertainers, people who work with children, teachers, people involved in sales, public relations, and as well involved in the romantic and relationship experiences of like dating services. Now, on the negative side, if you have Mars in Leo, you can tend to be domineering, arrogant, self-absorbed, narcissistic, intolerant, egocentric, dictatorial, and stubborn or stubbornly demanding. So we're now going to move on to Mars in Sagittarius. So if you have Mars in Sagittarius, or if your sun sign is in Sagittarius, you might relate to some of what I'm talking about. So people with Mars in Sagittarius, this is the third fire sign. It's the more intellectual, subdued quality of Mars in terms of an action orientation. People with Mars in Sagittarius love their freedom and like to travel, like their independence, and like to explore philosophy, education, and higher consciousness, and in an independent way. They tend to not really be inclined to want to ascribe with any particular religious or spiritual path, but may tend to be eclectic. By the way, yours truly has Mars in Sagittarius. People with Mars in Sagittarius have an enthusiasm and a passion for expressing higher consciousness, truth, philosophy, or their perspective on sports or whatever their point of view is in society or culture. So the positive sides of having Mars in Sagittarius are being expansive, philosophical, optimistic, ministerial, explorer, visionary, honest, versatile, knowledgeable, and or expressing wisdom. So having a passion for Mars in Sagittarius can involve the following professions: ministers, professors, lawyers, explorers, people involved in service, sales, travel occupations, professional sports and athletes as well, interpreters and diplomats, or metaphysical spiritual teachers. Now, the downside, or the way that one may ego alienate with Mars and Sagittarius, who I'm revealing here, is a proclivity towards self-righteousness, exaggerating, overconfident, inflated, tactless, quarrelsome, irresponsible, and excessive risk taker, and or con artist. So this concludes our perspective on the fire signs. Now we're going to move into the earth signs, and this is going to get us going in starting with the sign Taurus. So let me get back here to Taurus. And welcome all of you who've joined tonight's live Facebook Live, and or if you're viewing this on my YouTube channel, ALTAZAR Astrology. So, again, I will mention, if you don't know where Mars is in your astrology chart, or the placement of the planets the day you were born, you're welcome to contact me. You can even email me, altazarastrology@gmail.com. That's one word, altazarastrology@gmail.com. Now we're going to move on to the earth signs, and we're starting with Taurus. So Taurus is the bull. So the bull is a grounded, pragmatic energy. And so if you're an earth sign, or especially if you have Mars in an earth sign, it means that your passion is here to get grounded through some kind of practical service dynamics in the world. And very likely to be someone who can manage resources and cope with details, and have a passion for nature and the organization of material resources, or the ecological, environmental safety associated with preserving nature. So if you have Mars in Taurus, it implies that you're going to have a determined, reliable, tenacious ability to work at whatever you go into. You're a sensual person, practical, loyal, decorative, artistic, sensible, lovable, and you take your time getting things done. You want to get them right. And when you get them right, you want them to last. Taurus is about durability. Now, if you find your passion in life, and you have Mars in Taurus, and you align with the truth of who you are, Taurus is a sign of being the builder or the accumulator of wealth and resources, and or the steward of resources and the ecology of nature. So farmers, real estate people, artists, singers. Taurus is associated with the throat in terms of the body. Musicians, consultants, contractors, builders, carpenters, and other types of construction laborers. Also involved in sales in terms of material dynamics, like working at Home Depot, or interior decorating, architecture. And the other side of the sensuality of having Mars in Taurus is the physical healing arts, such as massage therapist, or physical therapist, or those orthopedic-oriented medical professionals. So now we're going to move on to, well, we're not moving on yet. We want to talk about the ego side of Taurus position. So Mars in Taurus, in a negative sense, can be jealous, possessive, lazy, and stubborn, extravagant, have pride in material things, uncompromising, garnishing or garish, dictatorial, and of course overly attached to materialism and material things as a way for finding security and stature. Now we are moving on to Mars in Virgo. So Mars in Virgo. Virgo is the detail-oriented sign. It's the most pragmatic, detail-oriented of all 12 signs. It's the sign of intellect as is associated with evolving information, knowledge, and material organization. So the key words for this position of Mars is analytical, industrious, systematic, conscientious, service-oriented, fastidious, and practical. So what are the professions that may include this passion for Mars in Virgo? Well, it's accountants, bookkeepers, information technology and computer analysts and information systems professionals. It's also those who are involved as in any kind of management, office management, administration, higher levels of financial management. It also is very connected to those who could teach the sciences or material-related intellectual or engineering dynamics, or be an engineer, mathematicians, chemists, scientists, and administrators. So these are attributes related to Mars in Virgo. Now, the downside, if one is not, engaged in a sense of spiritual centeredness and or expressing their passion in Mars and Virgo, the negativity can come out as being overly critical, nitpicky, skeptical, aloof, perfectionistic, puritanical, narrow-minded, judgmental, and or a hypochondriac. So it is our choice in terms of choosing the positive expression of a planetary energy or the downside. Lastly, we have Capricorn, and Capricorn is the earth sign ruled by Saturn. It is the earth sign of those who may have somewhat of a hard life, but Mars in Capricorn is considered exalted. It's the highest placement of Mars, and it's a karmic placement. In other words, every planet has a sign that it can be placed in that implies either a high karma related to its placement or a low karma. So the opposite of Capricorn is Cancer. So we'll talk about Mars and Cancer later. That would imply harder karma related to the symbolism of Mars in a person's chart. Mars in Aries is considered somewhat of a natural position. Mars in Libra, the opposite, is considered in its detriment, and there's a challenge there. We'll talk about that as we go along. But Mars in Capricorn implies that the passion, the impulsivity, or the energetic sexuality of Mars is contained, controlled, and evolved in a methodical way. And so the key words for this placement are being ambitious, responsible, practical, efficient, patient, self-reliant, managerial, having strength, and having a prudent cautiousness about how to approach one's passion, work, or efforts in the world. The basic nature is organizer and manager. Professions that are associated with Mars in Capricorn, or sometimes with the sign Capricorn, are executive, politician, business entrepreneur, government service, osteopath, surgeon, as Capricorn is the sign associated with the bones, skin, and knees, joints. Administrator, teachers, principals, also actors, and even astrologers. But fundamentally, it's about those who, and other professions can apply as well. You could be a lawyer, you could be a doctor, you could be an athlete with Mars in Capricorn. But the point is that you're methodical, you have good strategic planning and goal setting, and you meter your energy well and properly. The downside, or the ego alienating side of Mars in Capricorn, is being too controlling, suspicious, intolerant, status conscious, materialistic, cold, judgmental, patronizing, and or retaliatory, and having an excessive attachment to social, material status in society. So we are now going to move on to the positions associated with the air signs. And as I mentioned air, I'm going to get some air going in here. There we go, my air conditioner. So hopefully you're going to hear me properly, and this microphone is going to be picking me up and not the air conditioner. But for you air signs, Mars in an air sign implies a passion for intellectual and or social, cultural, and communicative networking. And so it's the air signs are relationship oriented and information oriented. We're starting out with Gemini, the twins, and the sign of intellectualism. It is a sign of those who are very adaptable and able to communicate or evolve their communication. But with Mars in Gemini, it implies that there is a passion for information sharing, accumulation of information and knowledge, and or the sharing of knowledge and information on a local, mundane, or community level in a way that information can impact people. You could have Mars in Gemini and be a postal carrier. You're carrying letters and information to people. So the key words are intellectually inclined, communicative, verbal, versatile, friendly, witty, multifaceted, and descriptive. Now, the professions that can go with someone who has a passion for Mars in this sign are journalists, salespeople, transportation-oriented, truck drivers, taxi cab drivers, or people involved in dispatch and management of rail systems to truck companies. Advertising, teachers especially, secretaries, telephone or internet communications professionals, website designers, those involved in broadcasting, and artists who are communicators, like, and especially witty type artists like comedians. Now, the downside of, and the ego alienating side of having Mars in Gemini is being scattered, because Gemini is a sign of people who like a variety of experiences. They can be reading 5 books at one time and not finish any of them. They love to go to buffet restaurants and take a little bit of the shrimp, the corned beef, the teriyaki steak, and the tacos and Mexican food. So variety is the spice of life, but if one is so engaged in too many things, they're scattered. Overly talkative, insincere, evasive, cerebral, scattered, restless, and or contradictory, and sometimes a proclivity towards dishonesty. So we're moving on to Libra, the next air sign. So Libra is the romantic air sign. So Libra, associated also with Venus, is about those who have an idealistic side to being able to communicate and share the higher dimensions of intellect, art, and music. And so you'll find many Libras love and are associated with the arts in terms of art galleries, paintings, musicians, songwriters, singers, etc. So the quality of being the Libra type, or Mars in Libra, is being tactful, diplomatic, cooperative, and Libra is the scales of justice, so there are many who are lawyers with Mars in Libra. Peace-oriented, mediators, relationships are very, a passion for finding one's soulmate is very connected to Libra. Idealistic, sociable, and compromising. So the professions that go with Mars in Libra, or being a Libra sometimes, is lawyers, diplomats, artists, mediators, decorators, singers, beauticians, retail salespeople, especially in clothing sales or jewelry, models, judges, legal secretaries, being involved with dating services, also matchmakers and marriage counselors. So now we want to be reminded of the fact that Mars in Libra is said to be in its detriment. I'm going to tone down the air here. And so what does that mean? Well, the negative side of having Mars in Libra is not necessarily as annoying, although it can be for some people, or ego-oriented, but it is the behavioral proclivity towards being codependent, in which someone is overly accommodating to the expectations of other people to the neglect or detriment of their own being, or lacking the assertiveness skills to say no when they're too tired to do something, or they don't want to do something, or they give in to the demands of their friend or their lover or their spouse. And it's in a way being dishonest in terms of not accurately or honestly sharing how one feels or what one's preference is. So indecisiveness, insincerity, laziness, hypocritical, apathetic, elitist, or self-absorbed, which is not unusual for Mars in its negativity in any sign. It just has a different style. Also, Mars in Libra or Gemini can have a proclivity towards being gossipy or harboring resentments towards others in one's social circle if offended. Now we're moving on to the air signs. The air signs are, we're still in the air signs. I got lost there for a minute. This is the sign Aquarius, the last of the air signs. So Aquarius is the most determined of all the air signs and the most ambitious in terms of having an impact on the world at large. And so the Aquarius is the sign of the social humanitarian, the political activist. So the quality attributes of having the positive Mars in Aquarius is evolving one's unique individuality, being an avant-garde, even bohemian, progressive, visionary, a radical, but one that is trying to move the world towards a more loving or harmonious direction. Friendly, intuitive, humanitarian, organizational, futuristic, pioneering, and extraordinarily intelligent in a multi-dimensional way, associated with technology and information. So the professions that go with a Mars in Aquarius, sometimes an Aquarius, are scientists, inventors, and all the air signs can highlight to a certain extent people who like the air, like flying airplanes, or being involved in the airline industry. But Aquarius especially highlights the potential for being a pilot or being in the Air Force. Politicians, Ronald Reagan was an Aquarius. Electricians. Aquarius is the sign of electricity, in fact. And in fact, I know of one Catholic monk whose sun sign was Aquarius, who died by virtue of being electrocuted when he plugged in an electric fan. The irony of that. Computer programmers, talk show hosts, and broadcasters, two famous, more past broadcasters of nightly news and news on ABC were Ted Koppel and I'll remember his name. It'll come up in a minute. Anyway, Tom Brokaw, both Aquarians. In fact, I think both born within a couple weeks of each other. Astrologers, and in fact Aquarius is the sign of astrology, and so it's because it's a multi-dimensional futuristic orientation to understanding life and the meaning of life. Social welfare administrators, corporate high-tech managers. So the downside of having Mars in Aquarius, if one overly attaches to ego and alienates others, is being overly impersonal, unpredictable, erratic, rebellious, eccentric, negatively or violently radical in opposing traditional society, cold, tactless, cerebral, and or having a condescending superiority. So we're now moving on to the water signs. So this is the last of the elements, and as we see here, Cancers, Scorpios, and Pisces. So I will point out one easy way to learn the signs is to make this wheel and learn the order of the signs, the chronology 1 through 12, learn the elements, learn the opposites and the complements. Earth and water, air and fire are complements. So we're going to move into the water signs now, and starting with the first water sign, the sign Cancer. So as I shared earlier, Mars in Capricorn is considered karmically exalted, meaning if you have Mars in Capricorn in your personal astrology chart, good for you, because you have used your passion and sexual energies and channeled that energy positively and favorably for your soul growth and for the world in prior lifetimes. If you have Mars in Cancer, this is not to get down on yourself, but that's of all 12 signs, that's the most challenging position for Mars, and does imply that you have been overly emotionally reactive in prior lifetimes and are learning to temper your emotions and channel your energies in a way that can be nurturing. So the water signs are about sensitivity, emotionality, empathy, nurturing, compassion, and a sense of being able to work with the deeper emotional and spiritual, psychological dynamics of the world to facilitate soul growth, in essence. And so if you have Mars in Cancer, now Cancer is the sign of the crab. Crab, hard shell, soft belly. Crabs they hide under the rocks and they skirt out there and check out the world. So there's a cautiousness, and yet underneath that hard shell is a deep, soft, and sensitivity and a vulnerability. So with Mars in Cancer, the positive expression and passion is being sympathetic, maternal, protective, caring, receptive, engaging actions or expressions associated with maternality and or domesticity, or being a homemaker. So the professions that go with Mars in Cancer, and as a reminder, you can have Mars in Cancer and your sun sign could be Leo, your sun sign could be Pisces, it could be Taurus. So again, when we do a fuller interpretation of a chart to describe you more holistically, this is one side of your being. Your Mars is the passion for expressing service and energetic dynamic. So people with Mars in Cancer can be very good counselors. They can be very good parents or mothers if you're a woman, fathers if you're a man. It can be involved in the hospitality professions, such as catering, restaurants, hotels, and or domestic services like house cleaning to interior decorating to landscaping. Pediatricians, midwifery and the medical professions, psychologists, antique dealers, people involved with retail dynamics that are associated with furniture and or other domestic home appliances and or home tools. Plumbers, Mars expression in a water sign and profession, shopkeepers, and people involved in the food industries, laundry industry, and commercial hotels. So the downside of having Mars in Cancer is the being overly emotional, overly reactive, harboring resentment, or just stewing in a kind of caretaking of others to the neglect of one's own well-being, trying to fix others, smothering, dependent or codependent, controlling, and or being excessively sentimental. Those were the good old days, but never being present to enjoy the present days. We're going to move on as time is marching along here. So next is Scorpio. So Mars is in its natural placement in Scorpio. And we consider this a position that is also karmically quite healthy. Mars in Aries or Mars in Scorpio. But when you have Mars in Scorpio, you definitely have to find your passion in life. And it implies the passion of having a deep sense of emotional connection with what you're doing. Where the Mars in Aries is more about an action orientation, like surfing or rollerblading or being involved in football or bowling. But Mars in Scorpio is about a passion for a work experience that is penetrating and involves affecting other people, and such as like being an emergency room doctor, or working in a hospice situation with the dying and elderly, and being able to be clear and focused in terms of a caring related to crisis management. And so the key words for Mars in Scorpio are intense, deep, investigative, sexual, passionate, creative, transformational, insightful, resourceful, secretive, and efficient. So Mars in professions that are very highlighted to have a passion for Mars in Scorpio is very connected in law enforcement with the forensic scientists, those who study crime scene analysis, CSIs, and really look at are able to investigate and discern the details that can discover and convict a criminal. Detectives, administrators, but administrators of types of facilities that relate to people management, human resource management, also financial managers that are really managing large, like hedge funds or inheritances and wills and those kinds of issues related to insurance and taxes. Therapists and psychotherapists, and especially nowadays in the pervasiveness in this society of addictions, everything from drug addiction, alcoholism, to sex addiction, addiction therapists. Since Scorpio is also associated with death and dying and health, nurses and hospice workers, sex therapists, and or psychotherapists who deal with sex addiction, funeral employees. Also, Mars and Scorpio can make good actors, and healers, spiritual healers, politicians. Also, on the downside, prostitutes, archaeologists who are a form of researchers and investigators. I've shared financial consultants and priests, especially priests who may be in crisis dynamics or those who are giving last rites out in military conflicts. Now, the negative side of having Mars in Scorpio is a proclivity towards harboring deep resentments to the point of acting them out vindictively. So Mars and Scorpios can have a proclivity, on the high side. The high side is law enforcement or detectives. The low side is being very clever criminals. So there's that potential as well. Resentful, having a big sense of entitlement, which criminals can have. Stubborn, surreptitious, secretive, manipulative, sarcastic. They can be those who are keenly perceptive of other people's vulnerabilities and exploit them. Possessive, jealous, lustful, and need I say, the proclivity even towards addictions and self-destructiveness. So let's move on to our last sign of the zodiac and the last water sign, and that is Pisces, the fish. So Pisces are the most, like Gemini, the mutable sign, or Sagittarius, most adaptive. If you put your hand in a container of goldfish, you'll see them just scatter in all different directions. So Pisces can be very adept at not being pinned down and evasive. But the high side of Pisces, or Mars in Pisces, can be highly adaptive and deeply action-oriented towards a sense of deep compassion, a service compassion for healing, health, and or social services, and or a passion for the arts, music, and inspiration through those services that can also be ministerial. So the high side of Pisces is compassionate, imaginative, empathetic, unassuming, mystical, psychic, graceful, vulnerable, deeply emotionally, psychically sensitive. The basic nature is mystic or martyr. And so the professions that can go with being a Pisces are an astrologer, a mystic, musician, artist, actor. Bruce Willis, Pisces, was married to a Scorpio actress. I'll remember her name in a minute. So then doctors who are engaged in deep compassionate service, psychiatric facilitators or psychiatrists, priests, monks, and nuns, those who become renunciates and live much more a purely spiritual life, metaphysicians, poets, nurses, prison and asylum or hospital attendants, social workers, teachers, and motion picture professionals. So the medium that is most associated with Pisces is film, and one highlighted and celebrated movie director is Howard. I'm trying to get his first name, but he was the director of recent movies about the whales, Moby Dick, and also several movies in the past for Best Director. So memory's not doing great tonight, so we'll have to just let that pass. Ron Howard is the director I'm trying to think of. Okay, so this concludes our perspective. Lastly, I don't want to leave out, of course, since I'm a Pisces, the negative potentials for Mars in Pisces. I don't have Mars in Pisces, by the way, as a proclivity towards being indecisive, deceptive, evasive, escapist, self-pitying, impressionable, hypersensitive, codependent, and or proclivity towards martyrdom and self-denial. So the actress who who was married to Bruce Willis. Her name is Demi Moore, a Scorpio. Finally clicked. There we go. So I thank you all for being involved with this presentation. I hope that it's been informative for you. Again, if you'd like to find out where your Mars is placed in your individual astrology chart, I welcome your email, altazarastrology@gmail.com, or visit my website, www.altazarastrology.com. So that email address is altazarastrology@gmail.com. And as well, for those of you who haven't been to my YouTube channel, you can simply search Altazar Space Astrology. Have a blessed time. Take care.